Welcome to the second session of this short tour of Mark's Gospel. And today we're going to look at Jesus' Galilean ministry and specifically at how he taught through parables. This short video is designed to introduce the session, and then there's a PDF sheet available on the resource site for you to look a little bit deeper. In the pages of the New Testament, we see two very different ways of answering the question, who is Jesus? The Gospel writers, including Mark, answer the question by giving us snapshots of Jesus in action, in miracles and teaching. The other way is through the writings of Paul. Paul was very much influenced by Greek philosophical thought, and he answers a question of who Jesus is in theological terms, with abstract ideas and logical arguments. Jesus himself was a storyteller. And some of the stories he told are those we now know as parables. In the parable, the storyteller is comparing something with something else. And many of them begin with the words, "The kingdom of God is like." The idea of kingdom of God had developed in the 200 years before Jesus. The Jews longed for a time of God's rule that would bring an everlasting time of peace and justice. Mark believes that has happened in the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, but it is yet incomplete, because God's rule at the time of Mark, just as today, was being impeded by human sin, greed, selfishness, and self-importance. Mark wants to emphasize both that the kingdom of God is here already, but also the kingdom of God was still evolving and being built. Some of that is carried out through parables. Mark has rather less parables in his Gospel than do Matthew and Luke. Most of Mark's parables are very short, and just two are slightly longer, and one of those is the parable of the sower. Parables sometimes seem to be about how to behave. But if you look deeper, there are other messages within them. The parable of the Good Samaritan is a good example. Quite often we get the emphasis that it's about being compassionate to those in need, and that's certainly a message within it. But it isn't the main message. The main message is about who our neighbour is. It's about a challenge to us to cross boundaries of suspicion and hate, such as existed between the Jews and the Samaritans. If you want to sit down and just look at a few parables, have a look at Mark chapter 4. Because Mark records 5 parables of Jesus in that chapter alone. The parable of the sower is one of them. It's the longest, and also one that is explained. The disciples ask for an explanation. And this fits in well with Mark's idea of the messianic secret, that Jesus is the Messiah, the chosen one, God's anointed, who will bring in the kingdom. But not everyone gets it immediately. And that as the teaching is given in parables, the disciples ask Jesus, what does he mean? And Jesus sits down and explains it to them. Within the parables, there are 2 or maybe even more contexts. First, there is the context that Jesus told the parable in. Mark and the other Gospel writers may turn that around slightly because they're writing for a different context and they want to make a different message. And then, of course, we have to interpret the parable for our own times. The worksheet asks you to look in a little more detail at the parable of the sower. Take some time to enjoy that, and then tomorrow we'll continue Jesus' Galilean ministry and look at miracles.